Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for participating in the first roundtable of the webinar series Inside Club Football, organized by Johan Cruyff Institute in partnership with Portas Consulting. We will dedicate today's session to talk about what makes football clubs an attractive investment with three experts in this field. They are Nicolas Maya, operating partner for football at 777 Partners, Harry Moyal, Deputy General Manager at Olympique Lyonnais, and Harry Bryan, Senior Consultant at Portas Consulting, who will be moderating the session. I would like to remind you that you can also participate typing your questions to our speakers in the question tab you can see on the bottom right of your screen right here. So let's get started. Hey guys, good afternoon, and thank you so much for your time.
Hi, thanks.
Thank you very much, Gemma. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining this webinar where we'll be looking to answer the question, what makes football clubs an attractive, or for that matter, unattractive investment? I'm Harry Bryan from Portas Consulting, a global strategy consultancy dedicated to the world of sport. And we are very excited to kick off our new webinar series, Inside Club Football, in collaboration with the Johan Cruyff Institute. We'll be taking you behind the scenes of leading football clubs, exploring the strategic decision-making that fuels success on and off the pitch. Today, we are lucky enough to be joined by two esteemed guests, representing two of Europe's most storied football clubs, in Italy's oldest team, Genoa CFC, and the Ligue powerhouse that has won the most consecutive titles in Olympique Lyonnais. Our guests, as Gemma mentioned, are Nicolas Maya, an operating partner at the Miami-based alternative investment firm 777. Nicolas joined 777 in 2021 and now leads their football vertical. Joining Nicolas is Harry Moyal, Deputy General Manager of Lyon. Harry manages the club's strategy, commercial streams, and data science, with club revenues trebling under his tenure. This lineup provides us with a rather unique opportunity to hear perspectives from both the investor and club angle, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So, before we dive in, a bit of context on the scale and volume of club investment. 52 majority shareholdings were acquired in 2020 and the first 3 months of 2021 in Europe's top and second divisions, which accounts for roughly 5% of top-tier European clubs. And the pandemic has also accelerated this activity further down the football pyramid. The profile of these investors has also changed. For example, in 2000, no private equity firm or hedge fund had any ownership interest in a Premier League club. By 2010, this figure had risen to 2, and by 2020, 5 clubs were at least partly owned by a PE firm or hedge fund. But what is really happening beyond the headlines? How smart is this smart money when it comes to investing, transforming the strategy and business models of clubs? How will private equity deal with the high expectations and scrutiny of clubs' fervent fans? And finally, will European football be able to reach the valuations of American sports franchises? Those are some of the questions that are top of my mind, and please feel free to enter some of yours in the chat as we hear from our guests. Harry, coming to you first. Whilst you've been at Lyon, you've seen new investment, moved into a new stadium, and most distressingly, as a Spurs fan, managed to sell Tanguy and Ndombele for over £60 million. So obviously a lot has changed over the period. Could you bring to life how your club and role has evolved?
Good afternoon, everybody. I joined Olympique Lyonnais during the summer of 2015. And since I joined, my responsibilities have evolved. So at the beginning, I was the equivalent of Chief Revenue Officer, overviewing all the revenue businesses and support function associated to the business. And then as I progressed, I become Deputy General Manager of the club, in charge of overall strategy development, relationship with investors, and more during the last 3 years, in relationship with sports performance. So everything related to managing the squad, performance reviews, and data science overall.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that introduction. And Nicolas, coming to you, I guess you're still relatively early into your time at 777, but you've had significant experience in strategy and transformations. How have your first couple of months in post been?
Thank you, Harry. Yes, I mean it's been an adventure so far, right? So I come from a career in McKinsey and consulting, and my role in 777 is to think about the strategy, overall strategy of the group, how to in the future and in the near future, and of course in the long term, how to make this ecosystem of clubs that we want to create to work in a more harmonious way, optimizing resources, leveraging synergies, and of course working in key strategic initiatives across the board, right? So it's been it's been my passion. So very excited to be in something that, I mean, working on a function that I worked for many years in McKinsey, and now combine it with my passion and in football. Yeah.
Great. And on the topic of investment, I think it'd be great to understand, as a first question, what attracted 777 partners to European football? You have a minority stake in Sevilla, of course, a majority in Genoa. It'd be great to understand why 777 got involved in European football.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think that there are many reasons, right? And the first reason is we're fans of the game, right? We're fans of the game, and we love football and what it stands for, right? And that's more like on our drive in from our heart to be like we are fans. We understand the fans. We understand what each team wants to achieve. So we want to participate in that. Now on the financial side, I guess that there are the many reasons why, right? One is that football in specific has predictable long-term cash flows, right? Especially we think about TV rights. We know that those TV rights are long-term and basically predictable, right? We see how they have behaved in the past 20 years or so, right? So that is very attractive to every kind of investors. Also, what we realized, we knew it before, and that we realized during COVID, is that, well, live sports and specifically football is the king of content, right? It's as resilient as you can think of, right? So when you're thinking about an investment that can give you long-term returns, the combination of all this makes sense, right? And I guess Europe, and specifically Italy for now, but of course we were looking to many targets, is that we do believe, at least in Italy, if we just focus for a little bit, is that Italy is historically has been the biggest league, or among the biggest leagues in the world, right? And of course is right now in a bit of a decline. We believe that that is coming back, right? The league is doing the right things. New investors are coming to the league, so it's an exciting moment to be part of Italian football and European football as a whole, right? So for us, Europe is key, and that's why we wanted to be part of it.
Definitely. And that's really interesting. I think from the perspective of those, predictable long-term cash flows, you touched on media rights and the beauty of live sports. You touched on, I think, the attractiveness of Italy. What were some of the criteria that you looked for when you decided on Genoa specifically?
Definitely. Look, so TV rights is one side of it, but we also see potential on commercials, on fan engagement, and so on, right? So at least in our group, we were looking for teams with some historical heritage that have a very important history, and that the fan base is loyal, that you can see them, that the atmosphere in the stadium is great, that despite the performance of the team, that they're still coming to the stadium, supporting the club, and then engaging in different social media or even old school channels, right? And what we also see is where we can find the upside as well, right? So usually we see medium to big size cities, of course, but we want to see clubs that we see the potential, right? That a combination of commercial, of digital, of talent on the field, and of course support from the city itself it's a combination of all those things that we assess to make an investment, right? And all comes down to what's the upside, right? And not only for us as 777, but also how can we help the club to perform even better, right? We really want the club that we invest in to be better than what we are on the field and off the field, of course. So we want to become parts of that, or catalysts of that change, of that growth acceleration, and we assess all these dimensions that I mentioned.
Yeah, and an interesting question, I guess, is when you're talking about some of having impact, some of the returns, what sort of time horizon are you typically thinking about with club investments? I guess that's the one thing that we hear often. Some clubs require that longer term time horizon that might not often complement or harmonize with typical PE funds investments.
Yeah, no, that's a fair question. And look, one of the reasons why I joined 777 is that the way it's designed is that we are a permanent investment company, right? So we function very similar to a private equity firm with external capital, but as in essence, our capital is proprietary, it's originated internally. So we don't really have a set time horizon, right? We don't have timelines and so on. So one, we're there for good, right? We're here because we believe in the clubs that we invest. We're for the goods and for the bad as well. So we're going to be there even if things are not working well or so on. So that gives us not only us and the fans and the club the peace of mind to know that we are working on a project to really revolutionize and modernize every single aspect of the club, right? That we're not just going to invest here and there and then leave just to look for a quick return, but we're actually looking for a long-term relationship and, of course, a long-term investment in whatever we put our money on, right? So that makes a whole lot of difference, right? Because the conversations that we have with club, with fans and with some clubs, it immediately changes their mindset of how we can help them and how can we operate a club when you really just want to do the right thing, no matter the timeline.
Definitely. And Harry, great to bring you in here. I think Nicolas has mentioned and articulated some of those unique selling points, the points of attractiveness of football clubs. You mentioned that part of your role relates to negotiating, to speaking with investors. What do you see as some of those unique selling points and points of attractiveness of football clubs and Lyon in particular?
So building on what Nicolas has said, clearly the strong growth profile and predictability of cash flow is definitely one. I would just add, because he mentioned the part of the TV rights, which is clearly the biggest part, but you also have a very good level of predictability in sponsorship revenues. Revenues in sponsorship can span from 2 to 10-year period when you're talking about kit suppliers, for instance. And when you look at the value of sponsorship revenues in any given country, it's usually larger than out-of-home advertising market. So it's a big market, and it's attracting more and more revenue as your club profile is increasing. Then when you talk about ticketing, clearly there are very few events in general that can attract as many people in a place than a football game. If you put the parallel with a concert, there are a very limited number of artists that can attract more than 50,000 people for a concert. Whereas when you look at top sports team, they are doing this on a weekly basis. On top of that, on ticketing, and I think it's especially important in the current context, football clubs have shown that they have pricing power for their games. So in the context of high inflation or profiling high inflation moving forward, I think it's of particular interest for investors. Then I agree with Nicolas when he is thinking about the next wave growth coming forward. So when you think about trends in cryptos, NFTs, tech-enabled services, digital media, even sports betting, that all this can have a big impact on monetization of the fan base. And I mean, one of the things I was and I'm still believing is that it's crazy how much football has a disproportionate share of mind in the fans.
Yeah.
And when you compare that to the share of wallet that it represents, it's really ridiculous at the moment.
Yeah.
So I think that all these new trends will give an opportunity to monetize better this share of mind and transform it into share of wallet.
Yeah.
The last part I want to add to the cash flow profile is clearly for European football, the player transfer market. So before COVID, it has grown at I think 12% CAGR over 10 years. It's usually tracking the increase in media rights. And when it's well managed, it can represent up to 25% of revenues for a club on a sustainable basis. At least this is the case for Lyon. We've been quite good at identifying, training, and selling players, and it's a consistent stream of cash flow. So that's for the growth profile and predictability of cash flows. Then I think there are other kind of selling points. The second one I could think of is the fact that the valuation of football assets is quite resilient. It's not correlated to other asset classes, and it has been quite resilient over the last downturns. So clearly it's not very liquid. You cannot get out whenever you want and very easily. But usually valuation don't crash if you manage your club properly. I mean, one way to put some numbers behind what I'm saying is if you look at the increase of the S&P 500 over the last 20 years, it has grown 6% per annum. If you look at the valuation of US sports asset over the same period of time, it has grown by double that amount. I think it's mainly due to the fact that football clubs and sports clubs in general are evolving in an environment where there are high barriers to entry. It's not easy to come and enter the industry. Because of the predictability of the cash flow that we were mentioning before, because of scarcity, because there are not that many good assets in the environment. And last but not least, because of the extremely high, and you can even argue intergenerational customer loyalty. I mean, people are fans for clubs from one generation to the other, and they have a very high level of engagement. For instance, what was striking to me when I joined Olympique Lyonnais is when we were making customer surveys about our fans, usually engagement rates were 10 to 20 times higher than what I was seeing when I was a consultant in other industries. So that's what you're calling engagement.
Yeah, definitely. And the passion of football fans. I think you touched on a number of really interesting points that I'd love to get into. I think one of those was that new wave of monetization. And it would be great to get, Nicolas, your perspectives on the capabilities, the expertise that PE can bring to really accelerate that change and bring the sport industry, bring football clubs in line with, I guess, other industries that are maybe more technologically advanced in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. So there are many ways to achieve it, right? So Harry mentioned a few that are completely on point, right? So everything that has to do with crypto, NFT, and so on. But even like the fan experience comes from the fan. Let's come back to the basis of the fan, right? Even the fan experience in the stadiums, right? As of now, in except a few a few countries or even a few clubs, the fan experience in the stadium, it's quite the same as the one that I had when I was a kid, right? So how you interact with the stadium and with your phone when you are there, how you use the different screens when you are in the stadium, how you interact with other fans and so on. That's where we are very behind to the NBA or the NFL, right? So just starting from there. When you go out of the stadium and you're just a fan, again, like the fan engagement side of it, it's improving very well with the introduction of different companies such as Socios and other fan tokens companies and everything. But it's still like if you go and see what the leagues in the US are doing is with the NFTs and everything that the NBA did, it's just we're miles away from that, right? So I guess that the way that the private equities can do it is just one, bringing these best practices and these companies and all these new technologies to the leagues, to the clubs. I think that there's the appetite in the different leagues, and you can see it from the La Liga, from Premier and from Bundesliga, that they are doing a lot of that now. I think that the issue in there is the adoption by the clubs and how open they are to implement them in the day-to-day operations. And then the second one is just invest in this capital, right? Like we have the examples, and for example, us from the US, we are very close to different other institutions that have invested in that kind of assets, right? So for us is what we've thought about is like, how can we leverage that? How can we create partnerships or synergies with these companies that really help us bring the best experience to the fan on and off the field, right? And that would just increase the fan engagement experience for all.
Definitely. Yeah, no, and it is a really exciting area to explore and see what happens in. I'm conscious that we've had quite a lot of questions from the audience already. I think there's a theme coming through around the predictable revenue streams that you've both touched on, but how that links, I think, a lot of clubs still making losses in a number of the leagues that we've touched on, and how that balances with investor interest and investor involvement and the expectations. I wonder, maybe Harry, you can start on that one.
Okay, tough one. So my perspective on this is counterintuitively, I would say. I truly believe that you can make money in any football club. The question is really in terms of the way you manage it. So the question is, the club needs to be managed as a business and not as a trophy asset or something that is just to pursue wins. And if you're making irrational decisions, you're going to destroy a ton of value. So let me give you some examples. If you are setting your budget and your expenditures on the transfer market on prediction of what on-pitch performance will be in order to match your cost structure, it's a recipe for disaster. So you need to have a cost structure that is sound. You manage your costs. And clearly you hope for the best, you try to be competitive, but the idea is that even if things don't turn as you would hope for them to turn, then you don't lose a ton of money. It's easy in this environment that is really emotional and sometimes irrational to become crazy on purchasing a player or paying huge transfer fees to players and agents. But that's a lot of value leakage that you need to control. So that's my perspective. But happy to hear what Nicolas thinks about that.
Yeah. For me, I mean, not far from you, right? Like that, it comes all from discipline on the cost side, right? I feel that yes, a lot of clubs are not they're not bringing profits. Of course, a lot has to do with mismanagement, and a lot has to do with well, I don't mind losing a little bit of money here and there, but if, as Harry said before, if my valuation is increasing at that rate, well, the value that I'm creating, and eventually, if some investors are going to divest, they'll recoup that losses, right? Now, that is true if you even if you're losing some money, the capital injections that you are putting every year are not going to be higher than whatever return you can have, right? I mean, just by that, right? So even when I hear about them, I've been in a lot of these forums like this, when say like, yeah, well, with those valuations, you can afford losing money. It's like, well, at a certain point. And when I say at a certain point is that, okay, so now you need to start being very smart on how to operate your club. Try to leverage as much as you can the new growth that is coming in terms of revenues, right? We talked about the TV rights that are predictable, and a club per se cannot do much. The match day, you have to keep your stadium as full as you can. But then what you can work a lot on is on your commercial side, on the crypto side, on the NFT side, that new revenue streams to make it as the revenues to be as big as possible. And I couldn't agree more with Harry, the cost side is where the major efficiencies are, right? So there's a lot of ratios that you will see, and then that we take into account as well, the ratio, the wages against your revenue ratio, and the same with the admin plus that. And you can see when you compare across the board in different teams, you can see who are well managed and who are not well managed. And you can see that the ones that are well managed, of course, the valuation are going to be always better, right? Now, the risk when you are efficient with your costs is that, of course, the salary of your players is not as big as the big ones. So how do you compete? And then I bring something else that Harry said, like, then you have to be good at data analytics. You have to be good at play performance. You need to be very smart on the player transfer windows and so on, right? So it's a combination of a lot of different factors in revenue, in cost, in performance, in analytics, that you really need to make this work as a well-oiled machine.
Yeah, definitely. And I think translating that to your, I guess, first couple of months at Genoa, how do you bring that together and, I guess, focus on those different priority areas when you do, I guess, invest into a club and take over a club? If you could, I guess, talk everyone through that sort of prioritization strategy.
Yeah, definitely. Look, and it hasn't been easy, right? Harry knows this better than anyone, right? Like, especially we come to a club that has been operated in a way, and in Italian league in a way that has been consistent and have been fairly successful, have been sustainable for the past decade, basically, right? But if we want to look forward, then we know that we need to change things. Right now, we have a very good. The good thing that we found is that we got a great fan base. We have a great city, a very good, cool stadium. And the people that work in the club are very capable, and they have been working very well with us. Now, changing mindsets is always difficult, right? And priorities change, and there's always something urgent coming up, right? So we acquired the team in October, more or less. So we were already in the middle of the season. So it's been trying to balance the urgent and the transfer window right now with the strategic, right? So right now we're trying just to balance and not only our time, but our investments and our capital injections and both. And I guess that we're going to keep that for a few more months, and we're going to take advantage of the summer to really take a step back and say, okay, this is what we have to do. These are the things that are going to be transversal to the whole group. Whenever we engage or we include other clubs, this is what are the 4 or 5 transversal initiatives, and we can start working even better on that, right? But hey, it's about change management. It's about changing mindsets. It's about also prioritization.
Definitely. And Harry, it'd be great to come to you on some of those points that Nicolas touched on. I mean, you're in a position where you've been at Lyon now 5-6 years. You're working with different investors, different shareholders. I'd be interested to understand what some of their priorities are. And especially, I think, Leon, an interesting example where you have sort of almost 30% of share capital publicly listed. What impact does that have on some of the decision making of a club?
I mean, the fact that we're a listed company has, I would say, quite limited impact on the way we are driving the business and making our decisions. I mean, as a club, we don't have a dividend policy. No real impact on the way it is impacting our P&L. It's not also as useful as what it could be for other listed companies, because we are not issuing new shares often. So we are not raising money through the stock market. So I would say overall quite limited impact.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it was, an interesting area to look into and share with the audience. I think one interesting area as well that, Nicolas, you touched on right at the start of the call was that football ecosystem and being able to leverage synergies as 777. I think we've spoken about Genoa, but I'd be really interested in understanding what's your investment thesis for football more broadly?
In terms of criteria or
I think, great to understand almost the where next and what's informing that decision making.
Got it. Yeah. So look, in terms of a strategy, without getting into a lot of detail, we see 3 to 4 main synergies across an ecosystem of clubs, right? The first one, and I think that the one that is the most exciting for a lot of people is, of course, the player transfer synergies, right? We do believe that if you have a good ecosystem that makes sense between geographies, between nationalities, between different levels of the level of football that is played, that you can actually move players in a way that makes sense for the career, that is exciting for the career, but it's also good for the performance on each one of the clubs. That's the first one that we need to figure out, and I think that that's the one that is more exciting, and I think that's where the best synergies we can have, right? For that, you need to be strategic, not only on the geographies that you invest, but also in the kind of clubs that you invest in those geographies, right? You really can, and just to give an example that's not related to us at all, but you're really not going to get any synergies if you get Borussia Dortmund, and then you get also Inter Milan, right? Because I mean, they're competitors, they're peers, right? So you need to balance your ecosystem. So that's one. The second one is in the commercial side, right? Eventually, whether you're going to do with an ecosystem of clubs, right? You're going to go to your sponsors, to your partners, and ask them like, okay, look, we have this portfolio, we have this many eyes and people engaging with us across the world. What can we do with this? This makes it very interesting to a lot of different sponsors, a lot of different partners across the world. So that's another thing that we have thought about, that we can engage different partners and that we can find some value there. Just kind of shifting the power dynamic more on our side than when you're a small club. We have just a portfolio of clubs to offer. And then a third one, very quickly, is on the digital side, right? We're stronger. I mean, I think that we fairly believe when you have a digital platform that is big in numbers, you can do greater things, right? So the strength in numbers in digital is very important. So when you add those three and probably there are 3 or 4 more, that's the way we see at the club, right? And so at the synergy, right? So there are many metrics for each one of them that we evaluate or we assess in the club and for each one of the clubs and leagues. And from then we just make our decision to engage.
Definitely. And it would be great to bring in Harry on this point. I think as a independent club, as Leon, which of those, I guess, success factors, key criteria do you see as the most compelling case for this, I guess, multi-club ownership strategy?
I mean, based on my experience working in M&A, I would say I would tend to overvalue cost synergies. So clearly the digital ecosystem that you can build for all of your clubs, as well as any shared services or center of excellence that you can build, for instance, on data science for football, can be especially valuable, in my opinion. Then revenue synergies, as mentioned by Nicolas, could be great if you manage to make them materialize, but it's always trickier on the revenue side than on the cost side. So that's what I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one trend we spoke about there is multi-club ownership. Another in the space of investment that we touched on at the start is institutional investment, not only into clubs, but into leagues as well, and into the commercial vehicles of leagues. I think French example, conversations around both Italian and German leagues. What impact do we think that will have on the individual clubs within the leagues? Harry, I'd like to start with you on that one.
So first, I think that this trend about building commercial entity at the league level is a real trend, and it's here to stay. For me, it's a testimony that some of the savviest investors in the world are thinking that the growth prospect of football clubs is still intact. So based on everything that we've said at the beginning of the discussion, it means that they believe that the growth of media rights is here to stay. And then what it would mean for clubs, it will depend on the investor and the specific countries, but based on what we're seeing right now in France, because it's really under discussion at the moment as we speak. The idea is that it will bring some additional money for clubs to invest over several years. So potentially raising their profile and hence eventually their valuations.
Yeah, definitely. And Nicolas, how does it, I guess, feed into the decision-making process when you are valuing clubs, looking at different clubs to invest in, where there is that central league interest in commercial vehicle?
It's very important. It's very important, right? Because it shows top of mind 2 or 3 things, right? The first one is the ambition of the league to generate new revenues streams, one, and also like the ambition of them to be a little bit more creative and do more with their media rights, right? So that just by the intention, you can see that it's a league that is not staying on the status quo, but is doing something else, right? The second one is that means fresh resources in the future for the clubs, right? So I know, as Harry said, like it depends on the investment, it depends on the structure, what the deal is about. Of course, it depends also what is your club in the league. For Harry, as Lyon is different than the owner of another club in the league, right? So the assessment might be different on their interest in that, right? But I'll say that overall, like a good percentage of the clubs, or as an investor, if you're not trying to invest on these big ones, big clubs in the league, it's just fresh resources that if you see the 5 year before you're making an investment in your balance sheet or in your P&L, you didn't see them, now you're going to see them, right? So it's always good to have that. But overall, I think it's just it brings a dynamic into the league that is needed, right? A lot of our leagues in Europe are very comfortable with the status quo. By adding this, I think it just brings a new wave of dynamism that might just help in different aspects as well.
Yeah, just to build on that, I would say it also brings the perspective of adding new people and new capabilities at the league level in order to help some new untapped potential to materialize. So leagues usually, it's very different from one league to the other, but usually leagues are understaffed with not the capabilities that have evolved the way the market has evolved, especially lately with all the technological trends and media trends. So bringing these new capabilities at the league level can be especially useful.
Yeah, and this touches on a question from Saeed from the audience. I think we touched on there that the technological model is changing. The consumption of live sports is changing as well with the entry OTT, social media platforms. I can completely understand how actually the dynamism, new people at the league centrally can help accelerate the growth in those areas. How do you think those trends with respect to OTT will impact the sports broadcasting income? Nicolas, maybe I'll go to you on that one.
I think it's a great opportunity. And we, at least at 777, we like it. And if you see our portfolio, you're going to see that we actually have investments in OTT and streamers, right? In the US, there's one that is Fanatis, and then there's another one in globally that is Atalanta Media, that is dedicated to women's football exclusively, right? So hey, I mean, for us, it's just, look, it's a new dimension, a new market that has been on tap. Of course, there's a lot to work there and to optimize it and to make it right. But for us, it's just as much eyes and more, as the more engagement and the more eyes that we get in our product, the better, right? We need to get it right, of course, and we need to see and find what is the right value for this. I think that still, you can see it historically how that fluctuated and how some of these platforms have been doing well and then not that well because of the metrics that they manage, right? But again, like if you go to the intrinsics of and the idea of this is you have more eyes, you have more engagement, and that of course is always going to be good for any kind of media product, right?
Yeah.
I think that there are two levels to which you can analyze the OTT opportunity. The first one is clearly what Nicolas said, and it's basically a new player that are by nature potentially more global and that will compete with the traditional pay TV players in any given market. So hence potentially unlocking additional value. It also, in my opinion, and that's the second level, there's an opportunity at the club level to launch their own OTT with their own content, with backstage content in order to further monetize their fan engagement. There's clearly a segment of the fan base, whatever the club you're talking about, that is as engaged as your club can provide them some content. So the more you provide, the more they're gonna consume it. So the OTT opportunity at the club level is also a new stream of business.
Definitely, and I think it moves us on quite nicely to a question we've just had around really how do you capture those international fans? I think football clubs, maybe a challenge is really that average revenue per fan metric. When you think about the global following and boosting that number up, what strategies, for example, are Lyon implementing beyond just OTT to really both capture the attention of your international fans?
Okay. So our main focus over the last 5 years has been on boosting the size and engagement of our community on social networks. Because in our opinion, it's basically the beginning of the funnel of monetization of your fan base. And we are thinking and we are seeing that the market is evolving slowly but surely in that direction. There will be monetization of your fan base on social networks. I think there are several providers that are already showing the value of the fan base of clubs on social networks. And it will open some digital sponsorship revenues that some of the big clubs have already begun to capture. I think Chelsea, Real Madrid have made some initial examples in this area, but it will definitely grow over the next, I would say, 12 to 24 months very significantly.
Definitely. And Nicolas, with your 777 hat on, from a Genoa perspective, do you see it in a similar light?
Yeah, definitely, right. And of course we come from a different place than the Harry, right? Like Lyon has a tremendous presence in social media and competing with the big ones in Europe, right? In the case of Genoa, we are investing a lot on our own OTT with good content that will engage more fans across the globe. Believe it or not, the Genoa has a lot of has a big fan base across the world, right? In the U.S., especially Italian immigrants in Argentina. There's a connection between Boca Juniors and Genoa. So there's some good fan base, of course, and some players, international players that play in Genoa. Right now, the monetization for us is a little bit different, right? Because we in Genoa itself it hasn't competed in European competitions for a while, so we don't have the exposure as the Lyon has or other clubs, right? So the way we have thought about it is in two ways. One is with our commercial partnerships, right? So how can we bring the name of Genoa to other geographies, or even the ones that we feel that we have some kind of attachments, as I said, in Argentina or the Italian community in the U.S. Some commercial partnership that bring our name there, right? So that's one. The second is like how can we eventually play more games, friendlies? How can we have some presence, physical presence during the summer, or some kind of activities that we can be there closer to the fans, right? We've seen that that's been successful with other clubs when they do those tours for the preseason, and we're trying to do that. And then finally, again, as we think as a multi-club ownership, we want to create an identity, and that with a set of values and a set of principles that really people can feel connected to that, right? So we're still working on that, and you stay tuned. You'll see it soon. but that will be the other way for us to engage not only the local fans of the club, but then also people be like, oh, this whole organization makes sense, right? I actually connect with what they're working on and what they're about, right? So that's the other term.
Definitely. I'd be interested to really understand, Nicolas, from your perspective as well. I think you are sort of operating partner for football. How it works in terms of your collaboration with the club management at Genoa, in terms of we've seen more and more of these owner-operator models, I think more active involvement of investors, and just understanding in practice what that relationship looks like and works like in practice.
Yeah, definitely. So in my case, well, we also have I have a peer, another operating partner that is fully dedicated to Genoa right now. So that person is there working with the team, and 100% of his time is he's actually based in Genoa now. So my role, as I say, I'm a little bit more on the strategic side of it, like trying to think as a whole group, but at the same time, the way I engage with Genoa is in the strategic initiatives, and then of course communicated with my peer on what are the needs that they have on the day-to-day or on the short term that we as a holding company we can help them, or we can collaborate, right? So that's my role itself. But now on the second question, part of your question, is that as investors, we are very engaged, right? One of our, moving forward, what we want to do is always have majority stakes and these clubs. And the way we still refining the model, how to better be present, how to better make decisions and all that stuff. But what we want to do is to have people on the ground collaborating with the local management and creating synergies there, of course. But very much present on the ground, right? It's different being from Miami in our well-conditioned, air-conditioned office than on the ground in Genoa, right? So we're working on creating these communication channels and of course protocols and engagement rules that in the way that we feel part of the day-to-day as well.
Definitely. And how does that experience, I guess, contrast or is similar to yours, Harry, at Lyon with the different shareholders and investor groups?
We are, from that perspective, a very traditional company. We have different governance bodies. We have an executive committee with the top managers of each of the division meeting every other week or more often when needed. Then we have a management team that is also meeting on a monthly basis. And then you have the higher governance bodies with the board and the meeting between the shareholders. So, I mean, nothing really fancy, just traditional governance.
And I guess Lyon received that investment from a Chinese consortium in 2016.
Yeah.
Since then, we've seen increasing interest from US, European investors. Why do you think that is, and what do you think it means for some of the clubs? Is it something you've noticed in some of your investor conversations and negotiations?
Yeah, I think that there are more and more investors that are considering sports club as an asset class. And then potentially it is just broadening the horizon of potential investors and thus increasing liquidity. But there was some Chinese interest 5 years ago. Now it's more US based and from Middle East. I mean, it's changing, but overall I can see the trend continuing to grow and more investors being interested by football clubs.
Yeah, definitely. And Nicolas, in terms of some of those synergies you've mentioned, I think it's worth noting that, as you touched on, 777 have invested more broadly than football into different areas vertically across OTT, but also into other sports such as basketball, the British example. How do you see, I guess, yourself leveraging synergies across sports as well as across clubs?
Yeah, definitely. And that's interesting that you bring it up, because not only with basketball, but last week we had a firm retreat with even people from insurance companies and all kinds of industry, and the theme of the retreat was finding synergies, right? Sitting down with people and saying, like, how can we collaborate better? Even, of course, not, I mean, I say insurance, we might not have a synergy there, but I'm just saying about what's the motto or how we think about this, right? In terms of basketball, there's one very clear, I mean, there's one, the commercial that I already mentioned, that we think in basketball can be part of this environment of when we approach partners or sponsors. But the one that we are working on is on analytics and player performance and a strategic decision making based on data, right? So we are building those capabilities. We are partnering with experts on the matter, and I think that such as you've seen, the data revolution in the NBA is happening in European basketball, and of course it's happening in football, right? And those are skills that are quite transferable, right? So we want to build that muscle that could serve both sports. So that's like the big one that we see.
Definitely. And I'm glad you touched on that, because Harry, you mentioned that at the outset, it was one of your areas of focus, that data analytics piece. How much at the moment is driven centrally by Lyon versus actually some of the partners that you have in the space?
No, it's driven centrally by Lyon as a club and by the management team. So it's something that we are building internally. And
how big an opportunity from again, thinking about the potential with transfer value and revenue upside, is that going to be, and will that play in the next 5 to 10 years?
I mean, I'm probably biased because I'm a firm believer into what it represents. But in my opinion, for a club like Lyon, who is famous for his academy and his ability to train new talent, it's even more important because we need to not only train player, but identify, I would say, 16 to 19-year-old player to bring them into our academy to finish their training, and then include them and give them some minutes to play in the first team in order to bring them to their full potential in terms of value. But also in order to be more efficient in terms of selling a player and replacing him with a comparable, even potentially a better player that costs less. So it's an area that is, we're just scratching the surface. Globally as an industry, it's just the beginning of the trend. We've talked about recruiting during this discussion, but all the areas of performance, injury prediction is a huge field that can bring significant value to clubs.
Definitely. And it feels like we do need an Inside Club Football episode on harnessing analytics to really do it justice. I guess final question from me, and before we wrap up, it's worth looping back to the start. The first thing that, Nicolas, you mentioned in terms of what attracts you to European football is it's the fans of the game, being passionate about football. And I think it's worth acknowledging that everyone on this webinar is tuned in because they are truly passionate about football. And so whilst the financial elements are interesting, I think the football outcomes are really, at least for me, the bigger priority. I think looking forwards, how can we ensure that some of these investments, the involvement of private equity and hedge funds are set up in the right way to better position the global game to win the battle for attention and create even stronger relationships with clubs, with communities to ensure, clubs and teams are left in a better position?
Of course. I think that there's two things that we think are important. One, just as we as investors go and go through and we have a very structured due diligence on the club that we are investing in, the fans and the club itself should do a due diligence on us as well, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm fairly, and we are absolutely transparent on how we operate and who we are, and that should be the same in both ways, right? So that's the first thing, and then and some of the cases in which things have not worked out between private equities and fans is because there's not a mutual a mutual trust. There was not a due diligence on the other side of the spectrum, right? So I think that's the way to do it. And then, of course, over the course of the investment, we need to create those communication channels, right? And there should be ones that are very formal, that's committees or just assemblies and so on, and the other ones informal, just such as social media and such, right? But those are things that we're trying to figure out because we want to make it right for the fans.
Definitely. And Harry, any final reflections from you in terms of the future of relationships between investors and clubs and really getting the most out of those?
I really believe that there will be more and more interest from different kind of investors to football in the years moving forward. So I believe that, as we've discussed with the new commercial company at the league level, it means that at the club level, clubs will also need to make their revolution and bring some new capabilities in order to have the right people around the table in order to discuss with more and more sound and business-oriented investors.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you very much. And I think I agree. It's a very exciting space given the movement, but ensuring that things are set up in the right way to really benefit fans as well as the clubs is integral. Nicolas, Harry, thank you very, very much for joining the webinar. Everyone who joined, I think, thanks as well. I hope you found it a really interesting and insightful comment. That was the first episode of our webinar series, and please do stay tuned for future episodes coming up on a monthly basis. I'm going to hand over to Gemma now to wrap up.
Thank you guys for your insights. Looking at the number of questions, we could be an extra hour here, but we have to close the session. And on behalf of Johan Cruyff Institute, I would like to thank everyone for participating. As usual, it has been a pleasure to see so many people connected from all over the world and lots of questions, because at the end is what we aim to achieve when we open our webinars for everyone. So thank you for that. And I just want to remind you that you all will soon receive a link with the webinar recording. So you will be able to watch the session again if you like. And as Harry said, we invite you to stay connected. We will be back next month with another topic we hope will be also on your interest. So keep an eye on to our social media channels where you will find all the details. Thanks again and see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.